Well, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to Generative AI, reflecting on 2 years since ChatGPT's launch. I'm Pete Howard, Executive Director of the Digital Business Institute and Professor of Practice here at Questrom. We're super excited to host this second annual webinar on the impact and the innovations in Gen AI related to business. First, just a bit about the Digital Business Institute. Since 2019, the Digital Business Institute, or DBI as we call it, has been all about collaboration among industry partners, faculty, and students to tackle real-world challenges in digital business. We support actionable research, hands-on learning, helping businesses leverage technology to boost growth and enhance customer engagement. If anyone would like to know more, please reach out and contact me directly. Happy to chat. Thanks again for joining us today. So let's get kicked off. Gen AI has been around for decades, but I think we'd all agree that interest and actual capabilities has surged in the past couple of years, especially since the popular launch of ChatGPT. In the latest 2024 McKinsey Global Survey on AI, 65% of respondents report that their organizations are testing or using Gen AI in some way. And that's up nearly double, it was 33% in the prior year. And their expectations on Gen AI's impact remain high, with 3/4 predicting that Gen AI will lead to significant or disruptive change in the years ahead. Let's unpack that. To dig into the topic, let's meet our panel of experts. I'd ask you each to introduce yourself, your passion and engagement with Gen AI. Start with Ben.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Lubin. I'm a professor here in the Information Systems Department. My research and my teaching is both in AI and Andrei and I, myself in a second, have been lucky enough to teach an AI class to our executive folks for the last year and a half or so.
Very popular, right? Andrei.
I'm Andrei Hagiu, Associate Professor in Information Systems. Most of my research and teaching are on platforms and technology, but I recently moved into AI, Gen AI, because it's closer related to platform businesses, and frankly, because I wanted to learn more about it. I've written a Harvard Business Review article on it, and I guess my greatest source of learning is co-teaching this course with Ben. I mean, honestly, the way we say it is the best way to learn something is to commit to teaching, right? So it forces you to learn.
Fantastic. Chris?
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Dellarocas. I'm a professor of information systems here at Questrom. Many of you don't know me because I just stepped down for 10 years in the provost office, where I was the associate provost for digital learning and innovation. And this stint has made me very passionate about education, all the things that need to be fixed about education, not least of which is the cost, as you guys know. So my current interest around AI revolves around how it can change education, both at the corporate level and, of course, in a broader level. And I'm writing a book about it this year.
Thanks, Chris. And of course, last but not least, our guest online is Jeevan.
Thanks, Pete. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeevan Duggempudi. I am a managing director within Accenture's data and AI practice, and I'm responsible for driving some of the efforts within generative AI for life sciences. My background is in data science. I grew out of the operations research side of the world. Spent a lot of time in that across healthcare and life sciences early part of my career. But over a period of time, as I'm working with various enterprises and clients like this turned myself more into a data strategist over a period of time from a data scientist because we saw this increasing need of companies needing to understand what their data footprint is and how to get the data ready for the data science activities. So now I consider myself a consummate a data and AI consultant for life sciences. So Pete, thank you for having me here.
Well, thanks for being here, and even reflects our commitment to bring industry and academia together on these important topics. And he's been a friend of Questrom for several years. So thank you. Panel, here we go. What trends are we seeing? Let's talk about frameworks, adoption, issues we're seeing with Gen AI. Maybe Ben, we'll start with you and others just chime in.
So I think, right off the bat, it can be useful to have a little bit of a categorization of applications of this technology. And I think one way to think about it is to put the usage into three categories and maybe with an asterisk. Yeah. So category one is the one that immediately comes to mind. It's personal productivity or employee productivity gains through direct use of something analogous to the public models like ChatGPT, either explicitly those models or something that the company has grown internally, but through a chat type interface and for the purposes of employees' usage. The second category would be deployment of the technology in a way that is furthering business practice and business functions. So some kind of internal process that can be augmented by this technology in order to make it more efficient or to lower cost or any number of possible goals. Third category would be actually embedding it in a product of one form or another. Doesn't mean that that's necessarily an AI product per se. It could be that it's a new interface, a new structure, or a new feature, or a new aspect of some of these products. Then the asterisk is those few companies that are not trying to just leverage it, but actually build it. So that's kind of a category 4 or an asterisk category. You can think about who those are. Those are the Metas and the Microsofts, the OpenAIs of the world. And they're viewing this at their scale and their function quite differently than everybody else. And so unless you're talking about them, I think you can kind of think about the three primary categories I just gave.
Jeevan, maybe we'll go to you. What are you seeing with your clients from Accenture in terms of those three stages, or are there other frameworks that you're looking at it through?
No, I think from a adoption perspective, I think the three categories that Ben described is consistent with what we are seeing. What I would add is probably like another axis to these three categories, which is more around the value streams that are driving these three categories that Ben just described, right? So three categories of use cases. So what I mean by that is in life sciences industry, where I spend most of my time, the value proposition of AI and Gen AI and even data lies all the way from like R&D, early research to supply chain and manufacturing to post-market surveillance to commercialization of drug into the market. So when you look at like this opportunity map of AI and Gen AI, you have to look at this 2 by 2 in terms of like these three different like types of opportunities for use cases that Ben just described, but overlaying that with where they sit within the value stream and where it is from an organizational perspective driving most value to the company. So increasingly we are seeing this, especially 2024, we are increasingly seeing this like a relentless focus on value and value realization from generative AI initiatives. And while 2023 was a lot of experimentation, we see 2024 being like the foundational board to like move into like the scalable initiatives. And for that, the right operating model is required to like enable this like value realization that they're looking for. So overlaying the value streams coupled with the type of use cases is what we increasingly see with our clients as well.
We've heard level 3 getting into product, realizing value cases. Sounds like we're getting some adoption. Andrei, would you add to that or anything else?
No, I mean, I think Ben and I are very aligned on this because I think we think very much in because we think in terms of those three levels. I think we can go, I mean, I'll just hold a few comments for later. I think we can go a little bit more into depth into what industries are more likely to adopt Gen AI, what industries are more likely to be disrupted.
Yeah, let's get to that next. First, maybe coming back to Jeevan, you mentioned life sciences. Maybe a little more detail on specific use cases you're seeing, or you probably can't name your clients, but any examples that you could share?
Yeah, happy to, Pete. So, I mean, just life sciences, as many people know, is a very heavily regulated industry. So you would think of any biopharma having like these tons of like unstructured documents sitting across the enterprise. So some of our clients have like terabytes of like unstructured data, not to mention structured data in their knowledge repositories. So And today it's increasingly difficult for them to actually utilize this data to improve how they operate and get their drugs to market faster. So one of the examples where we increasingly see generative AI come up is to create what are called as clinical trial documents. So these are the CTD documents that any biopharma company needs to write. These are very large documents, but there is a structured format to these documents. But after a clinical trial and before somebody like a FDA needs to approve a drug, these documents need to be submitted to health authorities around the world. And it has a combination of both structured and unstructured data. So one of the most prolific use cases that we are seeing in R&D for generative AI is how do we use generative AI to accelerate writing these medical documents that are required to before you submit it to health authorities. And what we are seeing is 2023, they made a lot of experimentations. Every biopharma company in the world is starting to do some experimentation. But this year particularly, we are seeing some of them actually realize value. And the value realization is you have these like PhD level chemists, very high value chemists that are all they're doing is writing these documents, right? But if we can help them by giving them a starter kit that can save like 30, 40, 50% of their time to write these documents, you are opening this highly productive time of these writers, medical writers, to do other value added things. And we are seeing a lot of like productivity improvements coming out of, especially in the R&D space, because of like generative AI in medical writing use cases. So that's just one example, Pete. There are a number of examples as we go across the value chain, but this is one of the most prolific use cases that we see for Gen AI.
It sounds optimistic, right? Or promising, in that what I hear you saying is it's improving productivity. It's not displacing workers. It's just making them more productive, right? And maybe accelerating drug discovery for all our benefit.
Yeah. I mean, the time to market today between what people call as like database lock to like submission, which is when everything is like from a clinical study perspective is completed. Now you have to start writing these documents to submitting these documents. Today it could be anywhere from 6 to 9 months, because these high value chemists, PhD level chemists and other writers are actually writing these documents. But what we are seeing is this time to market now can be significantly reduced down to like 2 to 3 months or 2 to 4 months now. I mean, imagine any big company that can get their drug to market like 50% faster, and the time that those patients have access to those drugs, right? Really, we are talking about generative AI driving transformation change in how, at least in life sciences, R&D organizations operate.
Positive use case. Andrei.
Sorry, I just thought of a connection between what Jeevan was saying and to connect to Ben's points. So Jeevan, if I understand correctly, the application life sciences, that sounds basically falls into category 2 of what Ben was saying, which is basically using Gen AI to lower cost, improve productivity internally. I think what I wanted to ask, can you think of examples in life sciences where it's more than that? Because I think that's fine. I mean, it's lowering the cost, but I don't think that necessarily leads to competitive advantage. So the way Ben and I would think about it is, if you can use Gen AI to lower cost or improve a product, but in a way that, it's self-reinforcing. So I get more data from users or from customers, and then I feed that data back into the system, and then the system becomes more efficient or the product gets better. I mean, that gives competitive advantage. So, I mean, examples that I have in mind is like companies like Intuit. We had somebody from Intuit talk to us, and that's what they're doing. So they have a boring financial product for small companies. They started incorporating Gen AI. I mean, yeah, they're using Gen AI internally to lower costs, but they're also using Gen AI to get a better service to the customers, which is, again, I would say it's a level above just lowering costs. I agree everybody should do it, but I'm wondering if in life sciences you see examples where it goes beyond just increasing productivity internally.
No, I think you raised a great point, Andrei. So I would categorize this example. I'll just extend the example that I just gave, because this example could be a level 2 or could be a borderline level 3. And where I see a borderline level 3 is, to your point, this feedback mechanism back, right? So think of this particular example. So when pharma companies submit their documentation to health authorities like the FDA, they will have questions about it. And they have like decades of history with these health authorities where they have submitted documents and health authorities have asked them questions about those documents. Now, what if we feed that feedback loop of decades of history into your knowledge base so that when the documentation is created in the first place, you minimize recurrence of the questions from the health authorities, right? So
That's nice.
that is the kind of like feedback loop that we are already starting to see in the market. That will, again, that is where I start to see them move more closer towards level 3 of Ben's example.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great example.
So let's pivot for a moment and bring Chris into the discussion, and then we'll come back to industry and product disruption or enhancement. But Chris, you published an article in HBR last December on Gen AI accelerating employee learning and development. What are your thoughts on how managers and educators can best take advantage of Gen AI solutions?
Yeah, I mean, Gen AI is completely revolutionizing employee training and a lot of processes having to do with hiring and talent management. So, for example, Gen AI allows training to become completely personalized. We have systems now that can get information from your CV, from your history in the company, from your manager's reports, and they can automatically identify basically your skill levels, right? Your skill gaps, the areas where you may need some improvement, and they deliver completely personalized content to you so that you can improve in the areas that you need improvement. The content itself can be generated through AI and can be kept up to date through AI. You think of fields that are changing very rapidly. Well, AI is one of those fields. Digital marketing is another field where there are new techniques coming up pretty much every month, right? So Gen AI is actually used in a number of companies to update the materials, right? And they're up to date. And in fact, even legal firms are using Gen AI, beginning to use it in order to make sure that they're up to date with the latest regulations, know what they need to do, right? So the content is up to date. And Gen AI is also allowing new kinds of content to take place. Like think of interactive simulations. Like Bank of America is using interactive simulations where they train their staff how to deal, let's say, with difficult customers or with other situations. And guess what? Those customers are AI. They play their roles, and sometimes a combination of virtual reality or even just text-based interfaces allow you to do that and deliver better trainings, right? And also, so the other thing is, who gets the training, what the training is. The other thing that is changing is when training takes place. I mean, with AI, you can actually have training which is seamlessly integrated into your work. Instead of having, now we work, now we go to training, AI can detect when, for example, you have trouble with a new process or a new system, right? And then can deliver just-in-time modules or information or chats, if you wish, to just help you get up to speed. So, I mean, the sky is the limit in what's happening over there.
We've all been talking a lot about just this future of user interfaces that adapt to your personality, to your usage, to your, troubles that you might be detected as having. And it's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And what is actually even more amazing is that those things can work the other way, right? So you have a system which is helping you get up to speed with the system, right? But then what is interesting, it hasn't been tried as much, but it's definitely a possibility, is for the system to adapt in order to make things easier for yourself. I mean, just imagine the possibility that there is think of it, there's a new project management system, right, that this company is rolling out. And the system is basically noticing that a lot of employees have trouble, that certain processes take longer or they are much more error prone. Well, there are two ways to think about it. The one is we make more effort to train the employees to use the system as is, or we change the system. And therefore, we change the process to make it more user-friendly. I mean, just think about it, right? And this can actually happen in a lot of other processes. You think of AI, which is kind of running behind the scenes, a lot of experiments, right? And try to figure out which variation or which interface is chiming better with people, right? And then it can come to a point where, you know, they reach the golden mean and they reach actually an outcome, which is a system that works better, an interface that gives everybody the better experience. And of course, that works for customers, can work for employees, also for customers. I mean, so this is, I think really now we get into the realms of science fiction, right? Where you know, the AI is in fact changing how the company operates in real time.
Not too far off, right?
Yeah, also can do it.
Of course, we didn't intend today to get into ethical considerations of AI. It's a broad, vast subject, but in that use case, you know, you could see probably the benefit is that from going from a state where employees are judged and rated on their ability to master a system, the system can just be mastered through AI, right?
Well, or the system can be better or improved,
Right,
right? By looking how employees are actually using it.
right. Wonderful. Great. Yeah,
Just a
please.
second on that one. So I think one of the things that's interesting about the UX element in these systems is the evolution that we're watching in how user experiences and user interfaces are created. And to sort of take the other side of the equation for a second, to sort of play the devil and the devil's advocate for a second, we've spent 40 years trying to get away from text interfaces, if you think about it, right? We had green screens back in the 80s. Some of us in the room were old enough to remember that. And we spent a long time, hard-won gains, trying to not have our users type things into their one-line command lines, and we're back to it now. And so how do you kind of parse that? And my conjecture is we're not done. We haven't found the interface yet, actually, where this is ultimately going. A lot of smart people are going to think about it. Someone's going to come up with a way that captures a lot of the wonderful things that Gen AI does, that allows for the sort of really natural aspect of natural language that we all enjoy when we're using chat-like interfaces, but which doesn't have one of its most glaring problems, which is context. You come to an existing UI, an old school UI, not the green screen ones, but the ones that, you know, were built in the last 30 years. That very visual conception that you see before you cues you as to what's going on, what you need to do, how you need to do it. That context is not there when you see the single blinking prompt. You don't know what you need to do. You don't know what you don't know. And so I think there's a whole area, a whole research area, a whole application area, a whole product area, a whole direction to go in trying to figure out how to build user interfaces that give users context, but also capture the gains that Gen AI provides. And I think built into what you just heard from Chris is some element of this, right? You can get what Chris has said even without what I just said, but if you had them both together, you really have that science fiction outcome.
Yeah, and we're halfway there, right? We have now interfaces that, you know, you can, I mean, Gen AI can take a picture or a video and create a representation which basically encodes the context, right? So I think we will see something like what you say before much longer. It's actually quite interesting.
The technology's there. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do the product work to make it happen.
One thing I always hit on when I'm thinking or discussing Gen AI is, tell me if you agree, all the panel, but you know, is it important to understand or remember that the LLM is the conversational front end, but agentic AI, the agents that are generating the tasks and going and running a Python code program or going and, you know, through RAG, getting data, bringing it back, there's still contextual structure behind it, right? Or is that also going to evolve to where LLMs will just totally interpret and generate all that?
I'll jump in on this one. So, you know, I think it's useful to sort of step back and say, what are the kind of high level elements that this technology is kind of bringing that weren't there beforehand? And I would put it in two broad areas. The first one is natural language, right? The ability to communicate with it in natural language and or for it to absorb existing natural language, which we just heard about in this bio use case, many other similar ones. And then the other one is the kind of surprising one, one that we've all experienced who typed into ChatGPT before, this emergent understanding of common sense that seems to be present in a bunch of these models and is not actually obvious where or why that came from. That's a whole other discussion, but it's incredibly valuable. The idea that an AI system is possessed of a certain amount of common sense is something that has not existed previously and was long sought and long failed to materialize, despite a lot of research on that topic. And so those two pieces are present. And I think when you start talking about agent models and these kind of more advanced use cases for the Gen AI context, it's about how do I leverage those two elements and then combine it with other systems that are more capable at things that LLMs are bad at, and there are things that LLMs are bad at, to make a hybrid system that's more powerful and more useful and more valuable as an amalgam. And there's a lot of work and a lot of progress being made in that space right now.
So pivoting back to industries and disruption, Andrei, let's start with you. What other industries are being either disrupted or advanced for Gen AI or products?
So, I mean, I think there are two interesting ways to ask this question. One is to think about what products or services will be disrupted. And I think it's fairly easy to say something general like industries or products or services that have routine tasks, repetitive stuff, data intensive. Those will probably be first in the line of fire to be disrupted by AI. But so Ben and I kind of talked through this, and I find it a lot more interesting to ask the reverse question. So this is a reference to Charlie Munger. For those of you who are fans, there's always invert the problem. So instead of asking that question, ask the inverse. So the inverse question would be, what are products or services or like characteristics that make those products more immune to disruption by AI? And I think that's a little bit more interesting because it also leads, I mean, it leads to, how to say, recommendations for companies to what they can do to make their products more resilient. So I can start. I'm sure I don't have a complete list, and people on the panel can correct me or dispute. So the most obvious one would be obviously any product or service that touches the real world, right? So anything that involves sensory experiences for users, or it relies on making something happen in the real world, like very difficult logistics or something like that. I think that's hard to disrupt. Certainly with Gen AI, even more with AI in general, until we get extremely intelligent robots that can do everything. I think that's very tough. So you can take lots of examples there. I think that's quite obvious. Now, if you move to the digital world, so let's say, okay, we take aside the physical world and you say products or services that are digital, I think there's still differences. So for instance, product or services that benefit from, call it like network effects that come from community with other users, where like the network effects really matter. And since it's user generated content, like real connections with people as opposed to connections with bots. You can think of social networks. Social networks, platforms like Facebook, even Airbnb and things like that. I think those are going to be very difficult to disrupt just by Gen AI. A third one would be, so this is interesting, it's probably controversial, anything that really requires human creativity as opposed to AI creativity. And again, the difficulty there is to say, what's human creativity? What can human creativity do that can AI cannot do? And the way I would think about this is anything that requires context, like say custom, social, anything that requires a little bit more context that AI doesn't necessarily have. AI is much better at generating like lots of ideas, but out of 100 ideas, you can't say like this is a much better fit for today's customs and norms and things like that. And the final point that I would think about is something that makes, again, products immune to AI disruption is what Jeevan was talking about. So industries where there's a lot of regulation, where you can't just say, oh, we're just going to replace everything by an AI agent. So healthcare is probably one, financial services probably another one.
So much to unpack there in terms of the creativity, for example. I mean, there's a lot of studies going on in terms of marketing departments, creating different copy, creating different advertising vehicles, and the evidence starts to point to lots more productivity and output, but not differentiation, and therefore probably not effectiveness in the marketplace, right? Because it's just average.
Right, and you can think about it. It's much better. Gen AI is probably much better. It's just like here's 100 options, right? But somebody has to pick which one of those do we go for? And I still think there's an element to which, like, unless you think Gen AI has the full context of the world, like very subtle social, I mean, sometimes maybe that doesn't matter, right? They just pick one and it's fine. But in a lot of cases, I think like really good marketing agencies would probably say, okay, no, you need to make a very, very educated judgment about which one of those fits with the zeitgeist of the day or something like that, something along these lines.
And positioning, lots of different things, and things that are changing all the time, right? So history might not inform you of the right choice.
Another way to think about it is interpolation versus extrapolation. So the AI systems are generally very good at interpolation. They're good at blending different concepts together to come up with something that's an amalgam of the context that they've been given, which is powerful, useful, something that humans also do well and that we value. The AIs in general, and perhaps overgeneralize, are not as good as at extrapolation. So if you tell it something about this and then ask about something over there, that's where you can often get it to go quite off the rails. And humans are better at that still. Maybe that won't be in the future, but as of right now, humans are still better at that. So if you're trying to say, well, the history of X and such problem was like this for the last 5 years, but now context has changed. We're post-COVID.
Right.
Now what do? The AI may not have much to say.
Well, I don't know if I might want to interject some debate here.
Good.
Right. And a disclaimer, I grew up reading science fiction. Right.
Very good.
But I have to confess that I did not expect AI to get that good in my lifetime. So I was going to give a caveat to what you said and add the word today.
Yes.
Like, for example, I mean, we still don't fully understand how emergent common sense emerged from the algorithms, right? If you read the papers and you see how generative AI works under the hood, you cannot really understand. This common sense just emerged. And I think it was a surprise to the creators as much as it was for the rest of the world, right? So I cannot really say that the AI will not become more creative. Like, for example, or that AI cannot be used to pick a solution. Like I don't know if you guys are familiar, but we academics increasingly, one of the things we do is experiments, right? And especially in anything having to do with consumers, we have sometimes students as subjects, and we do various things. And and marketeers do focus groups, etc. Actually, there've been a lot of experiments that show that if you use ChatGPT, human, right, you actually get the same results. Right, which means that you want to try a new product or some new ideas. The idea of trying it over a ChatGPT, an AI focus group, would still potentially allow you to make a decision which is just as good as if you based on humans, right? That's number one. And then number two, about social networks, right? I agree. I spent a lot of years studying user-generated content. One of the phenomena we're seeing is that the emergence of generative AI has actually dealt a blow to a lot of those social user-generated content communities, because people prefer to just ask ChatGPT to get the answer as opposed to contribute content and engage in conversations with those communities. So there's a lot of interesting phenomena that would make me doubt whether what we believe is immune will actually remain immune.
Okay. Yeah, this is a very interesting conversation. So I'm going to reply in reverse order because I think the first point is more difficult and more interesting. The second one, let me just make clear what I meant with social networks. So I think, by the way, there's a parody of this. There's a company called, I think, Social AI or something, which created a social network where all your followers are bots. So this is an extreme example of like, do you think people prefer that or say Facebook? So what I mean, point taken that you can get better if the only reason you go there is just the quality of the content. You'll get like Gen AI is going to do better content, but the whole point of social networks is you want to interact with other humans, assuming that's the point. So on social networks where you want to interact with other humans, I think that's more difficult. On the first point, so this is the interesting one. So is there some inherent frontier or like superiority of the human brain relative to Gen AI? I'm completely fine extrapolating, let's say, how far can this go? And I think if you think about it, it's just data processing. So like our brain processes data from the entire world. Gen AI also processes data. Maybe right now it's just words, but you can think about if you give access to the whole world, maybe it's very similar, right? But if you think about, so there's a very good paper about this. I think everyone should read. It's called "Theory is All You Need," and it makes the point about like what is it about Gen AI what is it about the human brain that Gen AI is not going to be very good at for the foreseeable future. It's coming up. It's a bit like the extrapolation stuff. It's coming up with truly new inventions, like with truly new frameworks or theories to look at the world. So this is not a matter of like, oh, if I have all the data, then the Gen AI is going to beat us at any time. The point is, we seem to have the ability to have some intuition about data that doesn't exist yet and say, like, this is the experiment we should run to see if this theory is correct. So that paper talks about Galileo will think about, okay, the Earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around. Let us Gen AI at that time, like, based on all the evidence, based on what people are saying, what do you think? Gen AI was said, yes, the sun revolves around the Earth, right? It takes a very interesting leap of reasoning or leap of faith that, I mean, you can imagine a sci-fi future where there's robots that has all the sensory inputs that we have and has Gen AI, and then maybe it develops intuition. But that's really far. I think it's very difficult to do what you said just with Gen AI, just based on words.
I'll jump in too. So I think I have to be careful because taking the negative side is the dangerous side right now, right? So I think the odds are with Chris on this one.
That's fair.
That's true. But I'll put it this way. I think the reason why I'm actually ultimately optimistic in the way that Chris is, I agree with Chris, is because of the hybrid model piece. So increasingly, we're going to see the technology here itself not just be deep neural networks, but deep neural networks combined with a whole bunch of other techniques. And the sum is greater than the parts. And we really don't know where that's going to take us. And that may enable extrapolation in ways that we don't have right now, but we might have very soon, where the combined system is smart enough to use one of its other models to do things that the neural network can't, and then uses the neural network to combine it back together again in a very sophisticated way. And we're starting to see systems built this way. And I don't think we know where the end of that goes. And it could very well be that Chris is right because of that.
But don't you think it needs data not just from words? So when you say, like, for example, the neural doesn't it need words, but also say visual or other, like all the other data that humans have from all our senses to get to the same level?
Yeah, I do. I think like the more you give it, the more it can do, right? And so, and the more sophisticated these other modules that are being brought to bear are, the more it can do. And to bring it kind of back to a business context, that's also where competitive advantage can lie, right? So if I've spent the last 15 years building out really sophisticated sets of data, really sophisticated analytical models, really sophisticated tools of all sorts of different kinds, and now I can equip my Gen AI powered mechanism with those components that I have and other people don't, now I'm going to have an even more powerful system. So we're going to see more and more of that happening. Also, we're going to see more and more of for sale / public tools doing the same thing. So there's an internal and an external arms race going on. And you know, as a manager, you're constantly thinking, is it make sense for me to build this? Is my firm a technology firm that's sophisticated enough to want to do this? Or is it better for me to be buying this? If I'm buying it, am I buying a kind of relatively generic thing, or am I buying a much more specific thing? All of this is on the table, and it all stems from this increasing complexity of what these models really are.
Yeah, and of
Jeevan,
course, I mean,
sorry.
yeah, just maybe the last, and of course, the segment we haven't talked about yet. I mean, we talked about humans versus AI is what we can accomplish, humans and AI, right? How we can combine the two together to get more than each species can actually accomplish on its own.
That's the hope, right? Jeevan, what's your thoughts on all this feature? And then we'll pivot to a specific question from the audience that I think you could start with.
I mean, I would say generally that almost. So if anybody is not learning or using AI today, they will be at a competitive disadvantage tomorrow, right? The way that we need to think about these tools is to use them responsibly, like I think what we are saying, to keep the human in the loop, and to make sure that we use them responsibly. But to just say that no, we are not going to use these tools is probably not the right answer. I think somebody was saying about the proliferation of these tools in this technical, like agentic architectures, right? That we are now seeing increasingly come up this year. Philosophically, I think that there is also poses a little bit of a challenge from a provenance perspective, right? How do you track what every agents in this like multi-agent architecture is doing, and what you as an end user sees is the final answer, but that has gone through these different agents in the middle, and how do you track where decisions are getting made in this multi-agent? So there are some ethical, like responsible considerations that need to be built out as everybody starts to build these tools, both for personal as well as for enterprise purposes.
So, good segue. Let's pivot to a question from the online audience that kind of gets back into the organizational construct of adoption. The question, and it's been voted a couple times, what insight can you provide, starting with you, Jeevan, and then others chime in, on the functional persona within the enterprise that owns Gen AI and the budget and the outcome? I mean, to the point of multi-agents, right? I can anticipate your answer. Is it the chief tech officer, the chief product officer, CIO, other? What's the functional responsibility and where's it landing?
So let me just understand the question, Pete. So the question is how are we seeing increasingly the organizational and the responsibilities reside within enterprise functions versus like the functions that are like the core to the business, and where does this tech?
Yeah, I think if I interpret the question is, who owns it in an organization? I mean, people own things, they have budgets for them, they have responsibilities and objectives. I mean, everybody uses it, but are you seeing a trend of different, functional responsibilities?
I'll say this, right? Almost every company in the world is grappling with the right organizational model to set them up for success in how they use this technology today. And there is no right or wrong answer, because companies start with centralized, decentralized, they go to hub and spoke models. There is all sorts of variations that we are running into. But what I can say is, like, organizations are embracing the fact that they are themselves need to be more resilient to change from an organizational design perspective. So they are more like a lattice rather than a hard organization in that sense, especially in the construct of like AI and Gen AI. So I'll start with that, right? But where are we seeing increasingly organizations lean towards? I think this hub and spoke model is where we increasingly see organizations, especially in the construct of data, AI, and Gen AI, organizations are gravitating towards. So there are some core components that hubs will own, the central IT organizations or the central digital organizations will own, and there are some core roles and responsibilities that the functions will own. So how do we differentiate between the two? So think of it like demand generation, where ideas are coming from. What are the kind of opportunities that will get them those big, bold rock initiatives, right? Those kind of like ideation and prioritization of opportunities, placing like ethical considerations around those opportunities, and all of that is typically residing within the functions, right? Now, execution of those are coming to a center from a hub perspective, and the hub is typically the one that will provide you the tools, the platforms, the data governance, the responsible AI considerations. All of that is really sitting within the hub, and that is how they manage the delivery angle of this, right, between hub and spoke of it. But typically what I increasingly are seeing is ideation and prioritization is sitting within the functions. Delivery is more a co-delivery, right, with both the central organizations as well as the functional units teaming together to deliver a particular opportunity together, right? Now, every organization is different. There are some that have very small hubs and large spokes, and there are some that have thick hub and very small spokes, right? So every organization is different, but across the board, I think this hub and spoke model seem to be where they're gravitating towards.
Not unlike whatever typical digital capabilities structure in a company where you might have a center of excellence with IT kind of controlling things, buying the products, but different departments, different business units thinking about requirements and functional use cases. Right?
You're asking me, Pete?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. Sorry. 100%. Right. So again, demand management, budget allotment, as well as tracking, ongoing measurement and tracking. Security is a big area of focus. I mean, you guys have just addressed that. I mean, security cannot be within the function. Security has to be within the central organization, right? So because they own security from a CISO's perspective. So same thing with responsible AI. Responsible AI cannot sit within the functions. It has to be a central governed body that establishes how organizations use responsibly the data as well as the AI that is available within the enterprise. Ben talked about this whole notion of like build, buy, boost, where to partner, where to go directly, where to boost their existing capabilities, right? Those are the kind of things that the central organization needs to still like decide. So again, there are these variations of what roles will sit where, but there are some core themes that we are seeing like will ultimately like have to be done at the center versus in the functions.
Excellent. Andrei, did you want to build on that?
So Jeevan has a lot more experience with this, but I have a shorter perspective from two CEOs and founders. The answer is the CEO. I mean, of course, there's some things that can be delegated, but I mean, the reason I heard is, okay, there's a difference between cloud, let's say a technology like cloud, delegate to the CTO, and something like Gen AI, which I think most like good companies will realize this is a key strategic initiative. We have to redesign products. That has to be the CEO. Everything else stems from there. So to me, like, I don't know, I'm happy to debate that, but
No, but to Ben's point earlier, it could be so strategically critical to your company if it is really your moat, right? That you're going to protect from the competition.
I think even if it's not, at least you need to just like, in order to figure out if it is, like, it needs to come from, like, it needs to be a decision by this, like, we need to sit down and figure it out. It's way too disruptive to say like, oh, we're going to let the whatever delegate it. Like you would delegate the adoption of, say, how much should we put on the cloud and how much should we keep on premise?
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. Viewing it as a strategic choice, and even if you narrow the scope and think about it as a tactical choice, the analogy to cloud is interesting, right? We had a lot of firms that kind of didn't get ahead of the curve on cloud, and then their constituents parts did, and you have lots of little teams all building things on the cloud, and the central organizations, oh my goodness, we're like, we don't know what's going on in our own company anymore, and it's kind of great sucking sound if they started to figure out how to standardize that again, and or decide that they didn't want to do it at all, or any number of other things. So we've watched that over the last number of years. We've also watched the importance of analytics and various other statistical and data-oriented processes and careful considerations about what should be centralized and what shouldn't, and how it should work, and all the security and various pieces. So I think there's actually quite a lot of sophistication out there right now, having lived through both of those things, when now turning around and thinking about AI and realizing that it's very much what Jeevan said, right? It's about building an infrastructure at the central level that's thoughtful, sophisticated, hopefully secure, hopefully responsible, hopefully not releasing data in a way that it shouldn't be, but at the same time facilitating enough access and nimbleness at the periphery that competitive edge that might be present in crush. And that's a very hard problem, but it's also a problem that people have thought about with a different lens from these other two aspects for the last 15 years or so. And so I think there's a lot of hope that we enter this period with more sophistication than we might otherwise would.
Great. We'll pivot to one more question online, and then we can open it up for questions. I'm sure we'll have a lot of good discussion for the rest of the session. Chris, maybe this one starts with you. From a philosophical standpoint, we believe the workplace of the future will orbit around generative AI, or will generative AI orbit around human leadership? Please provide any examples if you can.
Was that again? Can you repeat the question?
Basically, who will drive the bus? Will the workplace of the future orbit around Gen AI? I guess I'm interpreting the question as a tool set, or, will Gen AI kind of drive leadership?
Wow, that's a really science fiction question, right?
Right. Well, that's why we asked you.
who knows, right? I mean, the most difficult thing is to predict those questions. I mean, a lot of it will depend on the choices we make, right? One hopes that generative AI will remain a tool and a collaborator. One hopes that generative AI will not become the master, right? A lot of it will depend on how we choose to use it, and that's why I'm thinking that really that the framework is not to just think who can do it better, humans versus AI. I think we're better off just investing in learning how to collaborate, and so that we become an indispensable part of the technology. Right? We and the technology together can have solutions which are better performing than either humans or generative AI. Because when you put them in competition, one is bound to lose, right? And no matter what happens, that's not outcome. When you view them as collaborator and both parts of the system are indispensable, then I think this is going to lead to a future which is going to be better for humans and most likely will be more productive.
Okay, please.
Can I take the stronger view? I would say like absolutely should be the humans, and we treat it like we should do everything we can to be the human controls it, and the AI is a tool. It's a very powerful tool, and yes, we should collaborate, but shouldn't we want to be in charge?
I guess you haven't watched enough science fiction movies.
I'm actually like I like science fiction. I don't want to be in the Moon's a Harsh Mistress. Like Mike directs the revolution, like the AI directs the revolution. I think it should still be a human that's should, as opposed to should versus what's possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Should versus could.
I mean, maybe technology will solve this, but I'm an eternal optimist in thinking that, I mean, go to the inaccuracy issues of Gen AI, right? It's still there. And there's the regulated industry problems that you just cannot turn it loose on regulated industries, on sensitive information, on anything where the downside is more than the few dollars you're saving on salaries. So one is that is still out there, and maybe it'll be solved, who knows, but I think we have hope.
I can jump in on this one for a second too. So I think, it's very natural to put Gen AI in its own bucket as separate from the last 70 years of AI and AI research. And it is different in kind, right? There's capabilities here and there's hardware, software, everything that we're talking about. There is a difference. I don't mean to minimize this difference, but it is also the case that we have a very long history of the broader topic of AI and the application of AI systems. And within that kind of framing, this question is about initiative. Who has the initiative? Does the human have the initiative or does the machine have the initiative? And we are way past the point where the machine has initiative in a lot of places. So we have already given the initiative over in all sorts of ways, right? Control theory and control systems and all sorts of applications. The system is in charge. The humans are just basically with the big red stop button. If you think about the way modern logistics runs, pick FedEx, UPS, Amazon. You think about Amazon, how it runs its business. The computers are in charge. The employees listen to the computer, right? The computer runs the show operationally at a big firm like that. The humans are pawns. So that's a little bit strong, but in some sense, that's what's going on. So we've already crossed that Rubicon quite a while ago in a lot of ways. The question is, is there something about Gen AI that's special relative to that question? And it comes back to the same points I made earlier about what's unique about this particular technology. It's natural language and it's potential common sense reasoning. Both of those things open us to potentially trying to apply it in new and different ways, some of which we're very uncomfortable with giving it the initiative over. And now the question is, do we have the discipline politically, socially, ethically, responsibly to hold off from giving it initiative in places where we decide, and who gets to decide, whether or not that's a good idea. So I think it sits within a much larger, longer, broader context. But saying that there's no initiative, we already passed that one.
So let's open it up to some questions here. I don't know if some of the audience has put them on the system or not, but why don't we start there with a live question? Wait for the mic, please.
Perhaps taking on Andrei's comment about Charlie Munger, flipping the question around, there's certain types of decision where you think AI should not be let loose to make them?
I'll answer that one right off the bat. The trigger. Number one answer to that question is the trigger. I do not want the AI in charge of the trigger. There was
Your,
literally the trigger,
the nuclear,
the nuclear button or the gun
Briefcase.
button, anything. There was an open letter from the AI, most of the AI research community at AAAI a number of years ago, basically saying, keep the AI off the trigger. By the way, even as I say that, I'm not naive that it probably won't be true. There's lots of reasons why various entities may choose to make another choice there, but we should be pushing very hard for that one to be sacrosanct.
others? Great
Yeah,
question.
I can add a little bit of an enterprise context to this question. So what we are increasingly seeing is organizations and companies, and this is partly driven by the EU AI Act that just got enforced like 2 or 3 months ago, right? Categorize the AI applications, step one, into some sort of a risk category. So if you deem an AI application as a high risk application because of how it is going to be used, then you have to put a higher bar in terms of how the decisions made by that AI systems will be used and by who and by when. Versus if that risk tier or segment is categorized as a low, and it is maybe a developer productivity tool or meeting notes, Copilot from Zoom or Teams, that's a very low risk application of an AI application. So for those kind of situations, let it take over. I mean, you have the ability to change it, right? So we increasingly see this as part of like the policies and governance that are being set up as first categorize, then decide how to make the decisions around it.
So I'd love the panel's opinion around sort of the cost of AI. And by cost, I'm not talking about societal costs, which is a whole different topic, but actually the computing power needed to run AI models. So I was at a conference last week. I'd love to get everyone's opinion on this, and talked about that. The fact that the actual cost of running all these AI models is not being passed on to the consumer at all. And the 2 examples this person gave basically were, one, to run one sort of ChatGPT query, if you translate it to the equivalent of water, it takes 1 liter of water to actually cool the computers to sort of run one query. That was one proof point. And the other proof point was that, and this may or may not be true, but the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania is being put back online for Microsoft to run these models. So just, obviously this is not sustainable. So really curious to hear what you think about how this energy consumption issue will be resolved eventually.
I'm happy to jump in. So I think one way to think about this question is a shift in how we think about the cost structure of computation in this Gen AI age, and more broadly in the neural net age, because that's the key piece of this. We're seeing a cost structure that a lot of us haven't thought about in 30, 40 years, right? We're back into a world where hardware is expensive relative to what you're trying to do rather than cheap relative to what you're trying to do. And that has a whole host of implications that we've sort of structurally buried for ourselves for a long time. Labor is the hard part. Hardware's free, right? That's the way we've kind of thought about it. That's not the case here. Of course, there are competitive reasons why certain costs are not being realized, but eventually they will. And so unless there are structural changes to the hardware side, there's a lot of companies working on this, but at least the trajectory that we're presently on is such that that shift is there. And that has implications for how we think about what we're going to do with this technology, right? The balance of costs when you're trying to build out a project are different if you're building it on a system that really does have very significant hardware and energy costs associated with it. This trend of increasing scale of the hardware and increasing scale of the electricity use of the hardware, there's not anything that I'm aware of that's indicating that slowing down, and at least not in the near term. And so I think as we think about what we're trying to build and why we're trying to build it, that cost structure should be part of it, including thinking about what the true costs are of the systems that we're building upon. And I think that gets back to what Jeevan said already all the way at the beginning. What's the value of what I'm really building? Because I better make sure that that value is high enough that as those true costs get realized, even in a world where they will get cheaper through time, but then what you want will get up. You'll want more and more anyway. So, is that value that I'm realizing enough to justify that eventual cost that I will have?
Here, here,
Hello, Professor.
sorry, we'll get to you next.
So my question, like it has been partially answered, but then still my question is, when we know that machine hallucinates in the background, and we're sure that it hallucinates somewhere. So, in terms of accuracy, at which level we are now, have we achieved? Can we say safely that like we can get 99% accuracy? That's my first question. And if we haven't achieved that state yet, then there are thousands of startups happening, especially in healthcare. So, like, do they obviously they must be running a huge risk of operating those startups and giving advice, which could be certainly a big threat to mankind. So, how should we tackle that?
I can take it stab, but maybe we also want a healthcare version for Jeevan. I think there's a couple ways to think about that. Certainly there's risk associated with these systems, and hallucination or other forms of error are possible. We've probably all heard about self-driving and how it's taken longer and ... and you compare it against perfection or against human drivers that are also blah, 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 all those things. At the same time, wanting high standards is essential. And another way to kind of think about it is, how do you actually tell, right? So one of the big challenges here is these systems are inherently complex, and they're inherently designed to capture a wide range of input, wider than we traditionally think about in our products. So the wider the potential input space, the harder the testing and validation problem. So how do you build out processes in your development cycles that are giving you enough confidence that you have enough reliability in contexts that are very broad? And this gets back to what Jeevan just said about thinking through the potential consequences of the domain that you're in. So if it's a low consequence domain, maybe it's okay that I have less confidence. If it's a very important domain where you can read risk, including like risk of death or risk of dismemberment or something, then you need very high confidence. And that very broad set of categories might tell you shouldn't even build this thing. So it requires a certain level of responsibility, the responsibility to think about this in a deep way and do it properly. I'll say one more concept relative to this, which is there's a difference between trying to answer using the common sense capability or the sort of broad data set of a general purpose model, like GPT or Llama or one of these kinds of things, versus building a bespoke solution based on a lot of very carefully vetted data using any number of techniques that might be appropriate, agents, training, RAG approaches, whatever it might be. Those kinds of things basically exist to try to tilt that needle towards more reliability. It's on the owner of this system and broadly society, as we start thinking about the policies and rules that we want for these things, to decide that needs over be worth doing and worth putting out in the world.
Thank you.
To give a simple, optimistic answer, our performance around hallucination has improved a lot in the last 2 years. So in certain domains and in certain types of conversation, yes, we have reached 99%, but not 100%.
Thank you so much for the panel, and it was a wonderful discussion. My name is JP, and thanks Jeevan for bringing all the insight from your life science industry. And I have a quick question. I was working as an AI product manager in the Merck Healthcare in the past, and Accenture was one of the prime partner for all the AI initiative. So based on my experience, and 2 years back, I have resigned from my job for my MBA, and now within this 2 years, the AI has advanced. GPT launching, we are driving this panel today for 2-year celebration. So my question is how we can address the problem of buying in from physician in a healthcare space or a life science space That is the one question, and how the FDS GXP compliance is impacting all the things we are implementing in the production. As Ben has mentioned in the second point, the productionizing is the one of the key approach in the AI. So how we can address those things. And the third is, if you are implementing a multi-agent system in a pipeline, so how this GXP compliance thing is impacting not to proceed further and complicating more further and further complication in your process.
Sorry, I'm happy to take that question, but I may have missed the first question. So I got the second one around GXP, the third one around agent complexity for GXP. The first one is what again?
The first one is like it's a use case basis. Like if you want to buy in something like a patent related or clinical trial from physician, that is how it is most difficult thing. So how a physician can trust on your system so that they can share anything with you, like to implement on your AI system.
So let me just rephrase that question so that I can just make sure I understand. So you're asking if physician can fully trust any AI system developed by anybody. So you're asking, how do they believe that trust? How do they have trust? Okay. So I think I'll try to answer all three of them in a similar vein. I think there are two sets of responsibilities in these kind of contexts, right? One is there are a set of responsibilities that the developer of these models, like the OpenAIs, the Googles, the Claudes, the Anthropics, all the developers of the models have a certain set of responsibilities that they need to make sure that they enforce before they publish the model. Now, the deployer of these models are people like us, right, who are actually deploying these models in an enterprise setting. Now, we have a certain set of responsibilities, like GXP in this case, as we use the models that are provided by these developers to put it in a context like life sciences or like a physician context. So those set of responsibilities are actually cataloged really well today, especially in regulated industries, right? So what we need to make sure is we are doing all the validation checks to your GXP as we are going through using a particular AI tool for, I don't know, clinical trial acceleration, for example, in that first case that you gave the example for. We need to make sure that every step along that process is documented and there is a clear provenance of data throughout that entire process. Should something be audited, that we can actually trace back where it came from. So all of those documentation is equally critical as the technology build element of this also. So that is how I'll try to answer that question. And the last question around agent is also the same, to be honest, right? Is I do think agents have a lot of opportunity and potential, but you have to like put appropriate safeguards too, like I mentioned earlier, because you have if not deployed properly, there is a possibility of losing that provenance along this entire workflow. So again, goes back to that initial set. How do you design the system in the right way so that you have every step of the way captured, documented for either definitely for a regulated case for GXP, even for unregulated cases.
That's right.
Thanks for bringing that. And it is still a headache. So I was working in one of the industry, like a TrackWise application. So we have seen like in TrackWise, like how we are maintaining the Mango Kara and all those things. So it's a really tough, but still, I hope it can be addressed in the real future, like how those documented can be compliant.
Yeah.
You were first in the dark jacket.
Hi, my question is around, forums, for example, Reddit, Quora, or, Stack Overflow. So there's a human element in all the discussions. And, whenever you have questions, you go through the, right now, today, what people are doing as engineers or software engineers, developers, they directly go to ChatGPT, type it out, and it gives you a perfect solution that you can use. So my question is that, do you think, as ChatGPT evolves and becomes even better, forums like Stack Overflow would eventually find a place in the graveyard? Or do you think these forums as a product would evolve and change from the way they are today?
Yeah, I can take this one. So it's back to the discussion I have, mini discussion I had with Chris. So I think the purpose of the, let's call it network, if it's something like Quora or Stack Overflow, well, what we really want is the answer, the content, and we don't really care about the human connection, then I think that's going to go to the grave. Like that part is probably more like, let's put it, it's more likely to go to the graveyard. If it's, however, for whatever reason, right? I mean, you can think about all the social networks, Reddit, Quora, LinkedIn, Facebook, like all of them, right? In some of these cases, it's not so much about the actual content. It's just the fact that, right, like you're just interacting with other humans. If what people want is interact with other humans, then, and humans say, even if they say stupid thing, that I know Gen AI is going to say more accurate stuff, but the whole point is I want to hear humans say stupid things. Then that's probably actually more resilient, right? Because you just want the, like the network effect is the human connection. But I think it's an interesting point, right? So if you think about it from the social networks perspective, they should, what this means that you should emphasize more the human element as opposed to the real expert. If I'm Quora, I would say this is more about connecting, like getting interesting answers from other humans as opposed to you're going to get the answer you want because, well, if that's what you want, then you can go ChatGPT.
Yeah, it's a little. I mean, those sites are, as my colleague said, they serve a lot of purposes. I mean, the one is informational, the other one is social. A lot of people actually use those sites. I mean, Quora in particular, to push their points of view or their agendas. There's a lot of propaganda, national propaganda happening there on a lot of topics, and those things cannot be substituted by ChatGPT, and a lot of other people are there to defend the point of view, or they just have fun seeing different factions fight, right? To fight it out. So I mean, those are things that are beyond just information role. Now, when it comes to Stack Overflow, I think that's probably a better example, right? A lot of people are, in fact, using Stack Overflow to establish a reputation as experts on a certain topic. And your Stack Overflow kind of ranking or rating is increasingly used when people hire as a tangible signal of somebody's expertise. So I'm hoping that this doesn't go away because this is going to deprive businesses and individuals a tangible way to demonstrate and assess somebody's expertise. Now, you're raising a very, very interesting question, though. I mean, Stack Overflow is particularly useful for brand new technologies where there may not be enough expertise there, right? And so the question is, and that's a good question for my colleagues as well, if it's something which is brand new and there's not a lot of things written, how quickly do the LLMs come up to speed with it, right? And is there perhaps a role for those forums to still become a very early forum of exchange for something which is brand new, and in fact the LLMs can learn from them, right, and eventually catch up. So I don't know. I mean, if you guys have any opinion on that.
I mean, one thing to kind of consistent with what Chris just said, the reason that the GPT is so good at this is because it's already read all of that stuff, right? So if that stuff is not present, it won't be trained to do it nearly as readily. So there is eventually here an equilibrium. We're in a cut and golden age where that data was already available for the things we currently care about. As perhaps, and I think the panel seems to strongly believe, there's going to be less of that kind of content written by humans for new technologies. We should worry that it will be harder for there to be the data necessary to train it to do what it needs to do. That said, that equilibrium will exist and the data will out in some form. I think if you kind of take that to its non-logical conclusion, it implies that the more homogeneous kinds of questions and answers are going to be in GPT or its equivalent. And the more esoteric, the harder, the ones that not everybody's asking, but it's niche and important to you, there's still going to have to be a human form of some form for getting those kinds of answers because the system won't have the training to do it. And in the really long term, it could be sophisticated enough to hydrate the use case that you were saying. I couldn't do this in XYZ scenario, and it could have enough agentness about it to try that scenario and learn something. But we are really far from that eventuality. So, until something that crazy is out there, it's not going to sort of on its own be able to learn enough to be able to answer a question like that. unless, we get a lot further down the line on these agent styles.
By the way, so I completely agree. I think that's a very interesting point. Like the idea that it might, even if you take away just a pure, pure social component and you say just information, like you might still need the humans to seed the information, right? And one way to think about this is like Reddit is selling their data to the Gen AI companies. It's very valuable. And I think that's still going to be true. If you think about like what type of data is going to be really valuable, right? I doubt that it's going to be the Gen AI data. It becomes this like self-referential data, right? So like if you want new data, proprietary data, it has to come from humans, right? So I think there's still value in these like let's call it social networks generally, but it's content as well. That actually can generate pretty interesting data, valuable data.
Thank you.
One more or two more questions, and then we'll do a round table wrap up. First,
Ladies.
Thank you so much for this panel. Very enlightening. Thinking about the hub and spoke model, specifically the spoke of manufacturing, do you see adoption yet on the production floor in manufacturing? How is that? What is the structure of that? Do employees down on the production floor actually learn the algorithms, the systems, whatever they need to learn to actually apply it? Or what? What do you see? And is there much adoption yet?
Jeevan,
Yeah.
you're on.
On the manufacturing side of the equation, I mean, I do not think the operators on the shop floor need to understand the algorithms in detail, right? What we are increasingly seeing is how do we make their jobs faster, better, and reduce the amount of like quality checks that need to be done to get the product out the door with a much higher quality. So where on the manufacturing side, we are increasingly seeing applications, and this is where somebody on the panel was also saying, I know there is a lot of buzz and excitement about Gen AI, but there is a lot of classical AI that goes into, especially in this construct of like supply chain and manufacturing and automation, right? So we tend to forget about like those elements in the construct of like the larger Gen AI, but manufacturing is a great example where the collective like classical AI, machine learning, data science, automation, and Gen AI are actually improving how things get done. So all the way from sourcing the parts to like identifying faults on the shop floor to improving like what kind of quality checks need to be done to different batches in different parts of the world. So there are so many use cases under manufacturing that are actually driving productivity improvements and quality improvements. So I do think they're driving tangible value, but I don't think we are training the operators on how to use these tools rather than training them on algorithms.
Last word, question.
Hello, my name is EJ, so a freshman student in math finance program, and we have been discussing a lot about the corporation operation and like structure, and I kind of want to shift the topic to like the actual application of Gen AI. So I have done research on financial forecasting of like Gen AI. So there's a lot of like versions of neural networks that can be used to do like financial forecasting, such as like large LLM on like a news analyst and do the estimate of the impact of news. So my question would be, where do you think like Gen AI is going in terms of like the financial forecasting and these topics?
Do you have a thought?
So that use case of trying to automate the understanding of large amounts of natural language information and then trying to turn that into a trading strategy, something that's been around for a very long time. There's lots and lots of funds, hedge funds, you name it, that have tried it through time. It's clearly the case that this technology is creates the opportunity to do that well. And so I don't think there's any doubt that that is being and will continue to be applied. I think that the other question comes in sort of a bunch of the other aspects of the broader financial space. What can this technology do to help our financial institutions do all the other functions that they do in a more effective, more efficient, more equitable, pick your favorite objective. And I think there's a lot of promise in a lot of other areas. You could think about how they interact with their customers, how they run all sorts of internal business processes, where this kind of common sense reasoning and natural language capability is really valuable. And then I'll just finish by saying the broad space of trying to use machine learning and other AI techniques in finance has been the agenda for most of these firms for a very long time now. And that's going to continue. It's not just the Gen AI specific text-based approaches. It's all these other approaches happening at the same time, so that the wheels will continue to turn. We'll stop with that.
Great. Hopefully that
Thank
answers
you.
your question. So fantastic discussion, great questions. I wish we had time to answer them all. I apologize, but please feel free to email us at the Digital Business Institute. We'll try to contact you individually if that's of interest to you. So what a heck of a journey we've taken, right? From frameworks to use cases to industries that will be disrupted or augmented to organizational structures to the future, that whether it's science fiction or not, of where things will go, humans versus bots. Who knows? It's just an amazing discussion we've had. Maybe as a final word, I'd like to ask our panel each to say a few final words and their thoughts. And maybe if I could ask and say what you want, but one question I have is, when we have our session 1 year from today, what will we be talking about? Chris, would you like to start?
Oh, yes, we'll be talking about how the skills-based paradigm powered by AI is becoming a linchpin of talent development, workforce development, and is percolating into education.
Fantastic. Andrei.
Similar. I think the part that's most interesting to me is there's a parallel between thinking how companies should think about, okay, which tasks are best done by AI versus which tasks are best done by humans. But I think that applies at an individual level. And I think especially for younger people, is thinking about, okay, which types of things I should really learn and get depth on, and which types of things I can rely on, Gen AI. Like, given that you can't possibly know everything, I think there's an interesting decision, like which types of skills are going to be commoditized and maybe shouldn't spend too much time on versus which skills you should probably slightly develop.
Go to Jeevan and then Ben. Jeevan, final words?
Yeah, I guess, so I'll try to answer your question first, Pete. 1 year from now, I hope we move to scalability a lot more, right? We see these tools adopted much more, and I hope that we do not have a Wall Street Journal moment where somebody negatively use these tools in a negative way without the appropriate user consent, right? So that's my hope in 1 year from now. But honestly, I think where I see a lot of this going is we will continue to see this relentless focus on value realization through these tools and technologies. We'll continue to see focus on responsible and ethical use of these tools. We'll continue to see investments made to build out the digital cores of our enterprises and creating an enterprise cognitive index, right, of some sort that would scan all the documents. And we'll continue to see the upskilling and the digital fluency of these enterprises. So to me, I all those vectors are very much in play for 2025.
Ben, final word?
So I think we're going to see maturation along all three of the areas that I talked about at the very top. But I hope that's not all we're talking about. I hope we're also talking about something that we have no idea what is right now, some applications or some structure or some way of interacting or some use case that we didn't see coming, but some really, really smart person figured out that they could do. That's what I want.
Fantastic. Well, I hope we're here next year, same group or more, talking about great things. I just want to thank our panel. Really appreciate it. Thank you, especially Jeevan, for taking time out with your vast experience and your client knowledge. And thank you each. Fantastic. And thank you all for coming.